Hi. This Isn't Normal is the first novel I ever wrote. It was the first novel I ever attempted to write. And it all began with something I'd noticed. My sons graduated from high school in 2001 and 2004. I graduated from high school in 1976. And the conversations they heard, the things they heard people talking about in the hallway of their schools were so different from what I used to hear back in the 70s that it shocked me. And I knew that in the 1970s things had changed since the 1960s when my older brothers were in high school. And so I thought, how can I wish I could show some of these young people what teenage life used to be like. It was different. Back then, the Judeo-Christian ethic was still in effect for the most part. I mean, there were kids messing around back in the 1960s and 1970s, but there was sort of an expectation that good girls and good guys abstained until they got married. And so if a guy got handsy with a girl on his date, she could say, look, I'm not that kind of a girl, you know. And whereas in the late 1960s and early 1970s, there was the hippie movement, and with it came what we called the sexual revolution, the era of what they called free love. Now, free love actually just meant free sex. And so things changed between my brother's time and mine, and then to hear casual conversations about activities going on between teenagers in high school in the early 2000s had gone way beyond anything I remembered. And so I'd never written a book before. All I had written were puppet shows, and then I became kind of a screenwriter for public access television, and I put some puppet TV shows on, and you can see some of those on this channel on YouTube. I've posted some of them. And I had written letters to the editor to the newspaper, and eventually joined a voluntary community voices column in my hometown newspaper here in Savage, Minnesota. But I'd never written a novel before, and I just thought, I wish I could convey somebody from 2005 back to 1965, to my brother's time, to see what teenage life was like back then. And so I began to write a story that was like Back to the Future. In fact, when I first started writing it, I named the files on my computer Back to the Whatever, because I didn't have a title for it. And so the main character was a girl. Her name is Carla Hunsaker. Hunsaker is an old family name from back in my family line. And I wrote about a girl because I was seeing the effects of it on the girls in their schools. Girls that I thought were very vibrant and absolutely dazzling and charming in junior high. In high school, they looked tired. In fact, one of them I didn't even recognize because she looked almost sleepy when I saw her. And I thought, in the old pictures that my son used to show me in 6th grade and junior high, the girl was radiant. There are a couple of girls like that, actually 3 or 4 girls that looked radiant in junior high, and then by high school they looked like they were tired all the time. And so I kind of put 2 and 2 together, and I thought the pressure on these girls for what they have to do to get a guy's acceptance is weighing on them, and it's wearing them down. And so I thought, well, I have to write a story. I'd never written a novel before, and so I thought, this is either going to be a novel, or it's going to be a novella, or it's going to be a short story, or it's going to be a total flop, but I've got to try it. And so I started writing This Isn't Normal, and I didn't want to try to reinvent the time machine, so I just had the girl go to bed in her great-grandparents' house when her great-grandmother died at the age of 90. the family had gathered there to plan her funeral, and had her wake up the next morning in the year 1965. And not only is her grandmother alive and only about 50 years old, but that's her great-grandmother I'm talking about. Her grandmother was 16. Now she'd never met her grandmother before, because her grandmother died at the age of 38 before young Carla was born. And I wrote it that way so that her grandmother Cheryl would not have the complication of watching her granddaughter grow up and realize she looks just like somebody she saw in 1965 and start wondering, why is this? You know? However, I did have Carla look so much like her grandmother. She's kind of a genetic throwback, that her grandmother saw her and assumed that she was a cousin. And she got to stay with the grandmother for a week. She goes to her own high school. Like Back to the Future, she goes to her own high school 40 years in the past. And she and her grandmother start having some fun. They start dressing alike, and her grandmother even gives her a 1960s flip hairdo. And so it's Back to the Future fun. And then after a week, she wakes up in the right year again, and it's the very next day. So it's like it was a dream overnight, but she has solid memories of 7 full days in the year 1965, and the things she saw at first she didn't believe. And the title, This Isn't Normal, is a double entendre. When she first notices that the furniture is all wrong in the house, she thinks this isn't normal. And then after she observes a week in 1965, she thinks this isn't normal. And but then after she comes back and she has time to sift out what she thought, what she learned, what she witnessed in 1965, she starts thinking, no, that was normal. What's going on in 2005 isn't normal. Hence the name of the book. And this is the first book in my trilogy. And Carla, at first, in the beginning of the story, I thought Carla's the stooge, Cheryl's the smart girl. I thought Cheryl was my hero and Carla was the one who had a lot to learn. By the end of the book, I thought of them both equally the same. In fact, I thought Carla was pretty awesome because she climbed up to a higher level of living, having not had the advantages that Cheryl had. And so actually there's more time devoted to her time back in 2005 than there is to 1965. It took me a while to figure out, okay, now what's going to happen? She's realizing she's got to cope with all these memories, and she's got to be careful who she talks to about it. And the byline says, a paranormal experience brings a girl face to face with the grandmother she never knew and the grandfather she never liked. She never liked her grandfather, Cheryl's husband, her widower, because she thought he was too grumpy. And but then she finds out what made him grumpy, and then that changes her whole relationship. He becomes her favorite grandparent after that. So a lot of family fun in This Isn't Normal. And so it is the beginning, and at the end of this story, she wonders, what's it going to be like when I have children? Because she's seen how much things have changed in 40 years. And then in the next book, Peace Man, it's the protagonist is a boy, but Carla is on his college campus, and he has a similar experience. And then in my third book, For the Children, the time setting is the future, so they aren't traveling through time, but the reader is, and so that's how it became a trilogy. But anyway, this was my first book, This Isn't Normal, and that is how I came to write it. This is the book that made me a novel writer, and I hope you're interested in it. I hope you want to get it, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.